Capucine, bonjour.
Bonjour.
We should do this conversation in English because also the other artist participating in this exhibition, David Horvitz, is American. David couldn't make it for this conversation, but maybe if we speak English, it's a way to make sure he's included in the exhibition, even though he's sort of present because he has two works in the exhibition, and his work and your works in the exhibition are about the idea of the distance and the territory and how you represent a territory. So, a quick introduction. The exhibition is called The Scale of Maps. The title is The Scale of Maps, which in French would translate into halfway between l'échelle des cartes and also l'étendue des cartes. With all the works presented in the exhibition, you and David have been playing with the idea of the scale between the reference territory, which could be an experienced territory, and how you represent it through works that are most of the time real metaphors of the territory. So, Capucine Gros, you were born in 1989 in Switzerland, in Zurich.
Yes.
And since then you've been living in many different countries, areas, cities. So I should mention Switzerland, France, the US, mostly in New York City, Shanghai, and now you live in Bucharest, in Romania.
Correct.
David Horvitz has been also living in New York City, but now is back in California, in Los Angeles. The exhibition is called The Scale of Maps, and the whole idea of this presentation is to, through your works and David's works, to think about what defines a map, a geographical map, the link between a given territory, the link between a territory that you've experienced, and how you represent either the territory or the experience of the territory. And when we conceived the exhibition with you and with David, we went back to that fundamental idea in any process of mapping a territory, which is that a map offers some information, but also always requires a certain level of imagination. And do you remember while we were preparing the exhibition, we talked about that short story by Borges about that ancient civilization and people who have an issue with the maps of their own territory, and they end up making a real size, a real scale map, which then just covers the territory.
Yeah, beautiful.
And well, in this text, you still need imagination, even though you do the real scale map. So, a first overview of the exhibition would be that we've included the 5 works that you've made until now from a series called The Birth of Painting, and 2 other works from another series called Antarctica. And we have David's 2 bouquets, 2 mental imaginary maps. We've opened the exhibition on a Thursday, and yesterday was Friday. And we're lucky because the 2 works by David we have in the exhibition, the first one is called A Map of Paris from a Thursday, and the second, A Map of Paris from a Friday. So David being absent, you have activated his works, and you've been wandering through Paris on Thursday, looking for flowers. So you've chosen an essence, a species, which is white peonies, which in French is pivoine blanche. and you've assembled this bouquet, and the whole point of David's work is that in the handmade blown vase, and the total series is 7 for the 7 days of the week. You gather a group of flowers, and you pick each flower from a different place, and the idea of the map is the imaginary mental path between each flower, could be from a garden, could be from a flower shop, to the vase. And when we opened the exhibition on Thursday, we had the result of the first map that you've made for David.
15 kilometers.
15 kilometers, and Friday, yesterday,
Yeah.
so we opened the exhibition with the Friday vase being empty because it wasn't the day yet, and you've picked blue thistles, and you've gathered all the flowers to make the second bouquet. And at the end of the exhibition, after the exhibition, because we've documented these wanderings, we will make a book, a small artist book with you and David, which will tell the story of this exhibition, how it started, and offer to the viewer, to the reader, the experience of maybe how you make one kind of a map.
Yeah.
So the first birth of painting was made between 2015 and 2018 in New York City. It's the very small work that is here on the wall. So you've been living in New York for how many years?
At that point, 3 years.
Three
Yeah.
years.
But I had the idea for a while before
Yes.
actually starting it.
Yes. You said that the idea of this long series, which requires, I should say, all of the works that you have in the exhibition, you need a huge amount of patience
Yeah, I
to
think
make
it's
them.
not just in the exhibition, more or
Yes.
less in all my works. Yeah.
The title is The Birth of a Painting. Maybe I should just explain exactly what they consist in, because also in the image it's a bit
Yeah.
maybe harder to have a look. So in each place that you actually lived, not just visited, but really lived, experienced, you gathered, collected organic material, could be grass, could be wood, from the place, and then very slowly, patiently, you assembled all these elements, which are living elements, to produce an object which looks like a canvas on a stretcher, right?
Yeah, it's really built like a canvas in the sense I followed the same procedure as a normal canvas. If you have a piece of fabric and a frame, it's just that every piece of that is handmade, gathered, foraged from the area. And I think the similarity or the parallels with David are very interesting because I know exactly where in New York which piece of wood came and where the grass is from, and even this piece is really special because it took so long to make. You can actually see the difference in fibers where when my studio was in Harlem and then when I moved to Dumbo where I had some much longer grasses that were near the water, and you can see the difference in color and in texture.
And the 5 works that we have in the exhibition, which is all the works that you produced until now from this series.
From this series so far, yes.
The first one was made in New York City.
Yeah.
This one was made
in Serbia, in Jalovic, in a very small village. This one I made in just 2 weeks, so the technique improved.
The one behind you was made in
Connecticut, in Vine Farm National Park. And then this one in Shanghai.
Yes.
And over there in Bucharest.
Where you live now.
Where I live now. And
in Romania.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Why did you choose the title The Birth of Painting?
Many different reasons. But perhaps the most important is, in a way, the birth of painting is the stage before it becomes a painting. It's really the process before an image gets projected on it, before you add anything. And in fact, I don't add anything to it. I want to draw attention to where the materials come from. And this was at a time, especially 10 years ago, when I was in an environment in New York City, really in this storm of art making. And there's such so many things, so many fairs, I was working at Alfredo's studio at the time, so I was really in this environment of production, framing.
Well, it's just a detail in your
it's
CV,
detail,
but you've been the great studio manager of Alfredo Jarre Studio in New York for 6 years?
6.5, yeah. So I was really bathing in this environment of production, framing, and doing things on a very big scale. And I think as a counterbalancing response, I really wanted to slow things down and think, okay, where is each material coming from? What happens if I make it from the beginning? So this idea of birth really seemed very fitting. And also, when I initially conceived of this piece, I had in mind, I think maybe not so relevant anymore, but this idea of the death painting that some people were talking about, which I had an issue with, because I feel like painting has an important role, even in just the canvas itself. This idea of flattening the world into a flat surface, which is also the issue with maps. Like you were saying, every map distorts, but you need the distortion to communicate something or to inform. Every information is a distortion. So there were just so many parallels or things I was thinking about in this title.
There is the idea of a representation when you talk about painting.
Yeah.
And there's a link between representing the world, which could be a territory. In this case, each time is a different territory. And the representation of the object itself. There's also something performative in this work, which, well, whenever you explain the work, people understand that there's a long performance that is required and then leads to the final work, to the piece. You've been documenting also this process, which sometimes took a long time. You even said that in Shanghai, it's probably more difficult to find grass.
It was, well, actually the grass is okay. The trouble was the wood. So because at least this was just 2 years ago, and let's not even talk about what's happening there right now, but even back then when things were normal, they are cleaning the public spaces so perfectly. There is not a single piece of wood, and my idea is not to cut a tree. You know, the grass I can pick, it grows back easily. But so I was really looking for pieces of wood, and they have armies of street sweepers and cleaners. It's clinically clean everywhere, so I couldn't find wood. And in the end, had to go on the top of a friend's office building, where they don't groom very well, and it was lots of bamboos, and that's where there were these pieces of bamboos that I got. And this is also why this canvas is much thinner than the others, because the wood is much thinner. So the thickness just depends on the material itself. I don't decide.
I'm not sure in the image you can actually see it, but if you go on the gallery's website, there will be images, and you can see how it's true. This work made from Shanghai is less deeper than, for instance, the one in New York.
And I think that in a way, now that I've experienced David's piece, I realize that this is what I do every day when I make these pieces, because I have to work the fibers when they're quite fresh. So I cannot just go one day, collect a lot and save it. I have to pick on the moment and then do it within a few hours, otherwise they're too dry. So there's something in this sense very performative.
It's true that, because if we look at the first work that you started making in 2015 and the last work, which was made in 2022, this year, in Bucharest, in Romania, the recent works look greener. Because they're more aged fresh. Less, they're more fresh. But you applied, you said to make them stable.
To conserve.
To conserve them. You applied the technique.
but I only this year applied to
Yes.
all of them. So these aged naturally, let's say until now. And so now I did the similar conservation processes people do in natural museums for plants or any kind of natural materials, which involves freezing the works and then having a UV protective varnish that stops the pigments from fading and protects from dust and animals and so on. And different layers of that, freeze again, and so on.
The one, there are many things to say about the works, but the one thing I really like is, in the end, if you look at the first work that was made in New York City, the second that was made in a village in Serbia, the third one that was made in a park in the US, in Connecticut, the fourth one in a huge city like Shanghai, and the last one is Bucharest, which is another big city. In the end, everything looks the same.
Yeah.
As if
similar.
Similar.
Yes,
Similar.
yes.
Similar. So, as if you were observing the world on a very that was also an idea maybe for a title of the exhibition, a down to earth level.
Yeah.
Maybe the whole world looks quite similar.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something very universal
Yeah.
in this. And because also these are very, very basic materials that anywhere I go, I can find this basic material.
Maybe the small variation is that
Yeah.
in Shanghai it was bamboo,
Yeah,
for instance.
yeah.
Yes.
But the wood is different. I think we just have a better knowledge of bamboo versus other kinds of wood, perhaps.
And so the only way to differentiate them is to expand, so it goes back to the idea of the scale, expand the size of the work, because each new work increases by 1 inch,
1 inch,
on both
exactly.
sides in size. What was the idea behind this evolution, this progression?
I think there's of course a visual understanding that I like, but even just practically speaking, my technique has improved. At the beginning, it also took so much time because I was figuring out how to do it. But now I'm much faster, so I can go bigger and bigger, and also it makes a new challenge each time. Though at the same time, I never have, except in Bucharest and maybe in New York, where it was really in my studio and I had the tools, like a proper woodcutter. In other places, I usually have to really figure out how to cut things, how to make a frame for the weave. With whatever I find. So there was something, like it had to be small. But now, it becomes a new challenge. So I have to get pieces of wood bigger and bigger. And,
Yes.
And I like the idea that I will never go back down in size. So it's totally unique. Like even if I were to try to make it again, it's impossible.
Yes.
And this is something I like very much, but also in contrast to the environment I was describing, where a lot of art is so, editions or when you hire the framer and this, and you don't touch the materials anymore. Like, this is really what I appreciate, what I wanted or craved to do at the time.
Now there's something of course, about the space, because it refers to a territory, but because of that, there's also something about time.
Yeah.
And I should say maybe there's a few places in the world where the ground would be probably a bit different. One of them is, because that links to the two other works in the exhibition. So there's one on the plinth here, it's a bit hard to see, but again on the website you'll see many things, many images. So it's a project called Antarctica. I should just explain briefly. It consists of embroideries, very small works, very meticulously made works with a lot of patience, that once the embroidery is finished, you mount it on a small stretcher. So it's a canvas on a stretcher. The shape of the work is very similar to the ones on the wall, to the birth of painting, but what we see is a representation of a territory, the Antarctic continent, which, what you can explain, is probably one of the less represented areas in the world, even though it's a huge piece of land.
Yeah.
It's 14 million square kilometers.
Yeah, and we really need it.
Yeah, and everybody fights to get
Yeah.
resources and access to Antarctica.
Yeah, and I was, I mean, this stemmed from other projects where I was using a lot of maps, and over time realized that we actually never see or very rarely see the shape of Antarctica as it is. Mostly in world maps, you either don't have it at all, it's just missing entirely, or it's like a little flat squiggly thing at the bottom. And even if you look, for example, on Google Maps and you try to scroll down, you know, in other countries Google Maps adapts, so you always see the country whole, you know, that you cannot go at the end of the map. But when you go south, you get to the end and you cannot see it. You can scroll it, it's stuck. So even when you're looking for it, you don't see this shape. Which I thought was quite interesting. And then, there's also the geopolitical side that you were mentioning. If you actually divide up Antarctica according to the countries that claim different parts of it, it's like a pizza or camembert, you know, it's just completely ridiculous. Of course, this happens everywhere in the world, but I think it's a part of the world where most people don't know. And yet it's extremely vital for the planet. It's 40 degrees warmer right now than normal over there. And still we don't see much about this continent.
And so you started from...
And I started actually because...
One image.
Well, what I initially wanted to do was very simple. I just wanted to make some really beautiful prints of satellite image of Antarctica, and this was it. And so I was looking for this and going on different specialized websites where you can download high resolution images and so on. And it's impossible to find. And one of the reasons is because the demand is so low. Another reason is because satellites are usually going around the Earth according to the needs of telecom companies, not the North and the South Pole. And another reason is that the satellites are made to read land image, like colors like brown and green. So they're not made for the subtleties of whites.
Yes.
When Antarctica is often covered in clouds and it's very white. So even if you have images, they're just blurry white, which maybe is another project that's also beautiful, but it's not what I was looking for. And so the most accurate image that we have right now is from 2002, made by the NASA. And it's like this beautiful, like compiled image. And so I went from this and converted it into pixels so that I could then convert that matrix in a way to cross stitches. And so according to the resolution, if I have 1,000 pixels or 2,000, then that determines the size of the embroidery. So the smallest ones have a low resolution.
So each
bigger
stitch refers to
one
corresponds to one
Yeah.
pixel
Yeah.
from the image.
Yeah.
So you play with the resolution.
The resolution,
of the image.
and then the resolution determines the scale.
Yeah. So we talk about thousands of
Yeah.
stitches.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
There is, I should say, when I look at the work, it feels as if you were trying to compensate
Yeah.
the absence or the lack of representation of a major piece of land on the earth through a completely different technique. We're not talking about photography, which for many people look like the accurate technique. Probably it's not, but we need to think
That's
more about
debatable.
photography.
Yeah.
But you use a technique that seems so far from that idea of drawing a map through embroidery.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like the more the natural thing is one direction and nobody's paying attention to that, it feels like the more I should go in the opposite direction and in the hope that, what is this? And
Yes. Yeah. And you say you said that the idea of this project came from another very long project that you've been working on for many years, and it's an ongoing project called Approximately 199, which is not in the exhibition, but we should explain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, approximately 199 because I was wondering how many countries there are in the world. But actually this came from the year when Alfredo was doing his project for the Venice Biennale with the Giardini drowning, and we were talking about how many countries are not represented in the Venice Biennale. And so then I really had this question, but nobody agrees on how many countries they are. The UN says 196, the US State Department 190 something else. There are 211 FIFA teams. There are like 230 teams in the Olympics. Like there's so many different numbers. And then there are micronations and then governments in exile, and then all these different layers, countries that are half recognized, so on. And so for this project, I ended up choosing the number of passports. So that's 199. But in truth, so the project takes different forms. I have a performance wearing one shirt for every country. I started with little books, each has a page of that country. But in truth, I actually make 200 pages or 200 shirts for the approximately 20 million people who don't have a passport. So you have the 199 passports and then a blank shirt or a blank page for this passportless, which is 20 million. If the countries are ordered by population, so Vatican to China, and 20 million is, like 2/3 of the way. So this many countries are actually
And
less.
so you said that when you were gathering all the information and updating it every year, you realized that there is that huge piece of land, Antarctica, which is divided into many, many countries.
Yeah, because I had, this is why the sketchbook is made every year, because I cannot get it right. And what is right? Again, constantly this question of what is bias, what is so on, what do I do about Israel and Palestine, what do I do about China and Taiwan, etc. So I really tried to have this process of applying the same rules. And so what I decided to do with disputed territories is show them in both. So for example, China gets its own page with Taiwan and so on, but Taiwan, who still has a passport, gets its own page too. So it's kind of this utopian showing all the sides. So then I had to research, okay, how many, for each country, what are all the territories that they claim? Or either that they own and don't show. For example, France, who's has so many dum-dums, they're never shown with the map of France, because the map of France would be tiny. So my map of France is tiny, but includes all the territories. And then after a few years, it wasn't the first time I did, I realized where is Antarctica. And so then I started adding to the 8 countries that have a piece of it, a little triangle at the bottom. And I had to make my own maps, because you cannot find this. So I would do all this process of superimposing the maps. And this is when I realized that now I need to make something about Antarctica, because...
No, there is, this is the whole idea of the exhibition under the surface, if I may say, whether it be the Birth of Painting series, of course, I would say more obviously with the Antarctica project, and also with David's bouquet flowers, which are a metaphor, or the metaphor for a map. There is always something about politics, geopolitics, when you talk about maps. And we understand politics, I think, much more, especially these days, if we have an understanding of maps. No,
to me it's... and resources, where they come from.
This exhibition is really great. It's a beautiful exhibition.
Well, that's also
the opening.
Thanks
But the opening was 2 days ago. It was really successful, and everybody said there is because I think there's a lot of poetry in the exhibition. But it's also an exhibition that is relevant now. Well, you could say it's been relevant always, and it will probably always be relevant in the future. But under the surface of this exhibition, which is something that you don't, maybe you feel it, but you don't understand it at first when you enter the space, there is something about how we represent our territories. What do we consider being our territories or somebody else's territory?
And who gets to do that?
And so this question of borders, this question of history, So yes, it is a very a relevant exhibition to me. The articulation between your work and David's work in that sense is really beautiful. Yes, there is a link with organic material. You've been using organic material for The Birth of Painting. You've activated David's pieces by collecting, wandering through Paris to assemble this bouquet made of flowers, of fresh flowers. The second bouquet, which was made yesterday, which was a Friday, on a Friday, today we are Saturday, is made of blue thistles, which I think David has never used in his work, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have this exhibition. It's on until the 11th of June. I hope many people can come to Paris and experience the territory of Paris.
Yes.
Otherwise, we've been making a lot of installation views and many information about the exhibition will be online on the website. But again, it's like a map. You have the information and you have the experience of it. So it's better to come and see.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Merci à toi.